The city of New York had many ghosts, but none as dangerous as the one who moved through its streets with the confidence of a king and the silence of a predator. They whispered his name in fear, a name that could stop men mid-sentence, turn loyal allies into traitors, and make the powerful tremble in private. VITO Genovese. From the moment he stepped off the steamship from Italy, a boy with nothing but ambition in his eyes, destiny had already marked him. He was not born into power. He seized it, clawing through blood, betrayal, and unthinkable violence. And yet, there was a shadow over him from the very start, a hint that every move he made was watched, every plan haunted by forces he could not entirely control. Vito was born in a small Italian village, the kind of place where life was measured in hard labor and survival. But Vito had something different, a mind that saw opportunity where others saw danger, and a heart that ignored fear. At 16, he crossed the Atlantic, arriving in New York like a storm in human form. The city's streets were rough, the gangs ruthless, but Vito adapted. He learned quickly. Loyalty could be bought, enemies could be silenced, and reputation could be built on whispered rumors and sudden violence. By the early 20s, he was no longer a boy in the immigrant neighborhoods. He was a figure people noticed, quiet, calculating, always watching. But Genovese's rise was not simple. He survived bullets, betrayals, and near-death experiences that would have broken lesser men. Once, in the chaos of gang warfare, a bullet tore through his neck. He should have died. Yet he walked away, smiling, almost as if fate itself had chosen him. From that day, rumors began to circulate. Vito Genovese was untouchable. But such legends often carry a price, and the city seemed to sense that the calm of his early years was only the prelude to storm. The 1930s brought the city to a boiling point. The Castellamarese War, a conflict between rival Mafia factions, made the streets rivers of fear. Genovese was in the eye of the storm, a lieutenant and advisor in plots that would decide the future of organized crime in America. He orchestrated assassinations, manipulated alliances, and learned the art of control through both charm and terror. Each victory elevated him, but every move left questions. How far would he go to claim what he wanted, and how many would die along the way? By the 1940s, Vito had become a man who commanded attention without speaking a word. His empire stretched from the docks to the clubs, from gambling dens to illicit trade routes that spanned the Atlantic. And yet, he was never satisfied. When legal pressure and rival threats mounted, he fled the country, returning to Italy, where shadows of war and politics intertwined with crime. Some say he collaborated with powerful figures during the chaos of the Second World War, a man as comfortable in political circles as he was in smoke-filled back rooms. These years sharpened him, teaching lessons that would make him almost unstoppable upon his return to New York. Back in America, Genovese's ambition burned hotter than ever. He moved silently but decisively against his rivals. Key figures disappeared, murders were staged with precision, and whispers of betrayal followed him like a cloud of smoke. By the 1950s, he had executed some of the most daring hits in Mafia history. From a quiet Manhattan barbershop to remote estates hidden by forests, death followed his orders with eerie predictability. And as his enemies fell, his reputation grew. Vito Genovese was no longer just a player. He was a force of nature, a man who could rewrite the rules of power while remaining invisible to those who underestimated him. Then came the pinnacle of his audacity, the Appalachian Meeting, a summit of Mafia leaders from across the nation, convened in a secluded estate, designed to cement his dominance. But the world has a way of interrupting even the most careful plans. State troopers, suspicious of unusual convoys of cars, arrived unexpectedly. The meeting dissolved into chaos. Powerful men ran into the woods, plans crumbled, and Vito's careful orchestration faced its greatest test. Though he evaded arrest, the exposure was irreversible. The myth of untouchable Mafia secrecy had been shattered, and for the first time, the public saw the shadows he commanded. Even behind bars, Genovese remained in control. Federal narcotics charges eventually imprisoned him, yet from his cell, he continued to pull strings, orchestrating his empire like a puppeteer, whose stage was the streets themselves. Rivalries were inflamed, loyalties tested, and fear became a constant currency. Rumors persisted of hits ordered from his prison bed, whispers that terrified even hardened criminals. VITO Genovese died in prison in 1969. The heart that had fueled a lifetime of ambition, violence, and cunning finally stilled. But questions lingered. Did he fear the ghosts of the men he had betrayed? Did he regret any of the choices that led him to the pinnacle of power, only to fall behind bars? Or did he, as he had all his life, face death with the same calculated composure he had shown his enemies? The streets never forgot him, nor did history. Today, the name VITO Genovese evokes power, terror, and mystery. He was a man who shaped the American Mafia, who manipulated worlds both visible and hidden, and who left behind a shadow that refused to fade. Some call him a genius, others a monster, but all agree on one thing. In the deadly dance of ambition and survival, VITO Genovese was the Shadow King who almost ruled it all. Even as VITO climbed, his enemies multiplied. Every corner of New York seemed to harbor a rival waiting to strike, a snitch poised to betray, a shadow ready to engulf him. He trusted almost no one, and even among those closest, suspicion was a weapon he wielded as effectively as a gun. There was the story of a mid-level enforcer who thought himself indispensable, until he disappeared one night, leaving behind only a pool of blood and the faint scent of burned cigar ash. Nobody ever asked questions. That was the rule of the streets. Survival demanded silence, and Genovese demanded control. He had a peculiar way of testing loyalty. Friends were summoned to late-night dinners under the pretense of camaraderie, only to be subtly threatened, their responses gauged, their allegiances measured in subtle glances and carefully chosen words. VITO Genovese did not need to shout. The fear in a man's eyes was louder than any gunshot, and yet behind the fear, there was an undeniable charm. He could charm a judge, seduce an associate, or convince a rival that surrender was the only option. This duality, the predator who smiled, the king who whispered, became his signature. Perhaps the most enigmatic chapter of his life was the years he spent in Italy. Exile is often a curse for a criminal, yet for VITO, it was a forge. Some allege he negotiated deals with high-ranking officials under the guise of political alliances, while secretly trafficking narcotics across the Atlantic. Stories persist of clandestine meetings in shadowed villas, where fascist officers, American intelligence agents, and Mafia envoys all sat at the same table, their eyes flicking warily, their hands never far from concealed weapons. Whether myth or truth, these tales feed the aura of mystery that surrounds Genovese's life. It was as if every man who tried to touch him, whether politically or violently, risked stepping into a trap of their own making. Returning to America, he was a transformed man. The boy who once ran the streets of Manhattan had become a strategist of terrifying precision. By the early 1950s, he orchestrated hits that were as theatrical as they were brutal. Albert Anastasia, the infamous boss of Murder, Inc., was gunned down in a Manhattan barbershop while sitting in a chair, unsuspecting. Others vanished quietly in the night, leaving no trace but whispered rumors and a growing aura of fear. Genovese's genius lay not merely in violence but in timing. He struck when the world expected peace and avoided confrontation when suspicion was highest. The apex of his audacity came with the Appalachian meeting. For VITO, this was not merely a gathering. It was a statement, a calculated demonstration of dominance. Leaders of the American Mafia traveled hundreds of miles to convene, trusting secrecy is absolute. And yet, secrecy is fragile. A single observant state trooper noticed the unusual convoy of luxury cars and called in reinforcements. What had been a controlled exhibition of power became a chaotic flight into the surrounding woods. Mobsters scattered, alliances crumbled, and Genovese, ever composed, had to navigate not only escape, but the humiliation of exposure. The meeting, meant to cement his position, instead revealed the intricate web of crime to a nation that had only glimpsed shadows before. Even after Appalachian, his ambition remained undimmed. While public eyes scrutinized the Mafia, VITO continued to build his empire in the shadows, using intermediaries and coded messages to maintain control. He was like a spider in a darkened room, unseen yet omnipresent, each thread connecting him to extortion, gambling, narcotics, and political corruption. Rival bosses plotted, allies doubted, and yet Genovese maneuvered with the patience of a man who had lived decades under death's shadow and understood the game better than anyone. Narcotics charges would eventually catch him. In 1959, the federal government convicted him, sending him to prison for 15 years. To the world, it seemed the Shadow King was finally dethroned. But inside the walls, his influence persisted. Orders traveled through the prison bureaucracy like whispers in a cathedral, reaching associates who carried out hits, managed rackets, and manipulated markets. Even confined, Genovese was untouchable in spirit. Prison became another board on which he played his relentless game, proving that the throne of the underworld was not a place, but a state of mind. Rumors of his final years are perhaps the most chilling. Some say he plotted from his cell to eliminate rivals and potential informants, sending cryptic letters and messages through trusted emissaries. Others whisper that he carried grudges to the grave, and that no one who betrayed him ever escaped the consequences. The line between myth and reality blurred in those stories, as is often the case with men whose lives are so entwined with secrecy. He died on February 14, 1969, of a heart attack, but the end was far from ordinary. The guards found a man whose aura still seemed larger than the cell he occupied, whose mind remained sharp, plotting even in the moments when the world believed him powerless. Questions linger. Did he dream of streets he once ruled? Did he see the faces of those who had wronged him? Or did he finally feel the quiet satisfaction of a life lived according to his own rules, leaving behind a legend no law, no rival, and no historian could ever fully contain? Vito Genovese's legacy is more than organized crime. It is a story of ambition, cunning, and the delicate balance between fear and respect. He was a man who understood that power was not given, but taken, and that the most important victories often occurred not in the open, but in the shadows. Even decades after his death, his name carries weight, a reminder that some men are more than mortal, they are legends. New York at night was a city of whispers. Neon lights shimmered on rain-slick streets, but in the shadows the real power moved unseen. Vito Genovese walked these streets like a ghost. He could pass a man without the man knowing it, yet in that brief glance, the man would feel the weight of judgment, loyalty, and fear. Some said he had eyes that saw into the future, calculating every reaction, predicting every betrayal. Others believed he was simply lucky, that fortune followed him, that death had grown weary of chasing him. Whatever the truth, one fact remained undeniable. The streets belonged to Vito, and anyone who doubted it learned the hard way. There were nights when he would sit in smoke-filled back rooms, sipping espresso, listening. Men would argue over territory, rivals would boast of conquests, and allies would whisper their plans, and Vito would sit, silent, letting them reveal everything. A subtle glance, a slight twitch, a careless word. Each piece of information was a weapon he stored in his mind. When the time came, he struck with precision. A single phone call, a coded note, or a late-night meeting in an empty warehouse could decide life or death. And when the act was done, his face remained calm, untroubled, as if the storm he created was nothing more than a passing breeze. His personal life was as guarded as his criminal empire. Few knew the man behind the legend. He had friends, but they were always cautious, never fully trusted. Women admired him, feared him, and some loved him, but intimacy was a dangerous game. Rumors suggested he carried secrets darker than most men could imagine, confidences whispered in darkness that could destroy lives if exposed. And yet, in private moments, some glimpsed the complexity of Vito, a man who could show genuine warmth, a smile that lit his face for an instant, a laugh that could charm the most hardened associate. These glimpses, rare as they were, only added to the enigma surrounding him. Power, however, is a fragile companion. For every friend who stayed loyal, there was a rival waiting to take advantage of a misstep. Vito had enemies everywhere. Former allies, rival families, law enforcement, even members of his own organization who coveted his throne. He understood that paranoia was not a weakness, but a tool. He staged diversions, planted rumors, and sometimes allowed false betrayals to unfold, watching how his enemies responded. It was a chess game with real lives at stake, and Vito always thought several moves ahead. The assassination of Albert Anastasia remains one of the most famous moments of his career. Two men, disguised as barbers, entered the hotel's barber shop where Anastasia was sitting. The shots rang out, echoing through the marble halls, and when the smoke cleared, a powerful man lay dead. It was not merely murder, it was a message, a demonstration of control, a warning to anyone who might think of challenging the rising power of Genovese. Yet for all the brilliance of the act, it also marked the beginning of the unraveling. Every death sent ripples across the underworld, and every ripple brought attention, suspicion, and scrutiny. The Appalachian meeting was meant to be his triumph. Leaders from across the country gathered in secrecy, under the assumption that the remote estate in upstate New York was safe. But the universe has a way of intervening in even the most careful plans. State troopers, alert to the unusual traffic and curious cars, arrived unexpectedly. Men fled into the woods, alliances fractured, and the public finally glimpsed the shadow empire that had seemed untouchable. Vito's calm and composed exterior masked the fury and calculation inside. The failure of the meeting to remain secret was a blow, but he survived, adapting quickly and using the embarrassment to his advantage, manipulating rivalries and alliances with renewed intensity. Even in prison, his influence remained formidable. He learned to communicate through coded messages, intermediaries, and subtle gestures that carried meaning beyond the understanding of outsiders. Orders were executed with precision. Enemies vanished, territories shifted, and loyalty was tested. Vito understood that physical confinement could not contain a mind like his. Every action, even from behind bars, was a calculated move in the larger game of power. Perhaps the most haunting stories are those of his final years. Men claim to hear whispers of plans for revenge, schemes for empire, and threats that transcended prison walls. Some feared he could reach into the outside world with as much ease as when he walked freely through the streets of Manhattan. Even dying, Vito carried the aura of inevitability, the sense that nothing, not even death itself, could truly claim him. On February 14, 1969, the heart that had driven a lifetime of ambition finally stopped. Guards found a man who seemed larger than life even in death, a presence that refused to diminish. But questions lingered. Did he dream of the empire he built and nearly lost? Did he see the faces of those he betrayed and killed? Or did he, in those final moments, feel the satisfaction of a life lived on his own terms? A life of strategy, cunning, and shadowed dominance. Vito Genovese's legacy is both legend and warning. He was the Shadow King who moved through the underworld with precision and charm, whose name inspired fear, admiration, and awe. His life reminds us that power is never free, that control demands vigilance, and that the line between myth and reality is often blurred in the world of shadows. Generations of criminals, law enforcement, and historians alike continue to study him, trying to decipher the enigma of a man who was always one step ahead, a master of manipulation, and a true architect of the American Mafia. The nights in New York were a canvas for Vito's ambitions. Fog rolled over the docks, mingling with the pungent aroma of coal and sea. But Vito never noticed the cold, never noticed the mist. His mind was elsewhere, calculating, predicting, remembering every slight, every whisper, every unspoken fear. There was a dock worker, a small man who had once joked about Vito in a tavern. By morning, the man had disappeared. No one spoke of it, but the message was clear. Jokes were a dangerous luxury around Genovese. In the smoky back rooms of Little Italy, Vito perfected his art. Loyalty, he understood, was not given. It was tested. At one gathering, he asked a lieutenant to fetch a special shipment of cigars from a distant supplier. The lieutenant returned a day late, flustered. Vito did not yell. He simply studied him, eyes narrowing. That night, the lieutenant was quietly escorted from his apartment and never returned. The lesson was subtle but unforgettable. Vito noticed everything. Mistakes were forgiven only if they served his purpose. Yet, beneath the ruthless exterior, Vito harbored fears, private, dangerous, unspoken. He knew that every move he made drew eyes in the shadows. Allies could turn enemies in a heartbeat. The thought of betrayal gnawed at him like a persistent shadow. Some nights, alone in a dimly lit room, he stared at the ceiling, considering his enemies' next moves. Every strategy, every plan was a mental chess game, played on a board that extended far beyond Manhattan streets, reaching into Brooklyn, New Jersey, and even across the Atlantic. Vito's rise was punctuated by carefully orchestrated assassinations, each more daring than the last. The killing of Albert Anastasia was a masterpiece of timing and audacity. The man sat in a barber's chair, unsuspecting, when two gunmen, faces hidden, executed the plan down to the smallest detail. The operation sent a clear signal to the Mafia. Genovese was no longer a follower. He was a master. Yet each hit brought attention. Each death, though perfectly timed, left behind whispers, eyes that watched him more closely, and a growing network of law enforcement determined to understand the shadowy empire he ruled. The Appalachian Meeting in 1957 was meant to solidify that empire. Dozens of bosses traveled from across the country to a secluded upstate estate, blind to the eyes that would find them. Vito had planned every detail, the seating, the alliances, the exit strategies. But fate, or perhaps hubris, intervened. State troopers, suspicious of the unusual convoy, descended upon the estate. The meeting dissolved into chaos. Men ran into the freezing woods, cars were abandoned, and secrets spilled in panic. Vito, ever composed, walked away from the disaster, but it left a mark. The veil of secrecy surrounding the Mafia had been pierced, and the public finally glimpsed the empire he controlled. Even imprisoned, Vito remained a force. From his cell, he manipulated allies, orchestrated hits, and maintained influence over territories far beyond the prison walls. Coded letters, intermediaries, subtle nods during visits, all were instruments in his intricate web of power. Rival bosses were eliminated quietly, territories shifted, and his underworld empire adapted to his confinement. He proved that true dominance is mental, not physical. But behind the calculation, there were moments of vulnerability. Late at night, Vito would stare out small barred windows, wondering about the lives he had destroyed, the trust he had broken, and the price of power. He never allowed himself to dwell, but the thought lingered, hidden in the shadows of his mind. He understood better than anyone that fear could be as powerful as loyalty, and that a single miscalculation could unravel everything he had built. One of the most chilling aspects of his reign was the psychology of fear he cultivated. Stories spread of men disappearing without a trace, associates vanishing after a whispered warning, and rivals being eliminated in ways that seemed almost ceremonial. Vito understood that terror was a tool as effective as any weapon. It allowed him to control without raising suspicion, to command respect without words, and to remain untouchable even when the law seemed relentless. In his final years, whispers suggested he plotted from his cell, sending cryptic messages to loyalists outside. Every move, every message was a potential threat to someone who had wronged him. Even death, it seemed, could not silence his influence. On February 14, 1969, he passed away quietly in prison, the culmination of a life lived entirely on his own terms. Yet even in death, the questions remained. Did he see the empire he had built crumbling, or did he feel the satisfaction of absolute dominance? Did the ghosts of men he had betrayed haunt him, Or did he finally find peace in knowing that no one would ever forget the shadow he cast? Vito Genovese was more than a mobster. He was a master strategist, a manipulator of men and events, and a living testament to the power of fear, intelligence, and ambition. His story remains a cautionary tale, a legend of the shadows, and a reminder that in the world of the Mafia, survival is never accidental. It is calculated, relentless, and often brutal. And above all, it belongs to those like Vito Genovese, who are willing to walk the line between genius and monstrosity. Always one step ahead, always in control, always in the shadows. Vito Genovese often walked the streets of New York late at night, the city a labyrinth of shadows and whispers. He moved with quiet purpose, aware that every glance, every step, could betray him or signal his dominance. The city seemed alive, not with light, but with the anticipation of the unseen. And Vito had learned to speak its secret language. He could read a man's intent before a word was uttered, feel the tension in a room as if it were a physical presence. And in that understanding lay his power, fear, loyalty, and obedience, all crafted with the precision of a master strategist. There were nights when Vito would summon an ally under the pretense of camaraderie, only to test their loyalty in subtle, terrifying ways. A missed greeting, a hesitated answer, a slip of the tongue. These were enough to reveal a traitor. Some men disappeared quietly, whisked away in darkness, their absence a warning to those who might falter. Others were dealt more dramatically, a staged accident, a public humiliation, or a message left where the wrong eyes could see. Each act, deliberate and calculated, ensured that the streets whispered his name with a mixture of awe and terror. The assassination of Albert Anastasia in a Manhattan barbershop was only one example of Vito's brilliance. 2 gunmen entered, faces hidden, and when the shots rang out, the city trembled. But what few knew was the planning behind it. Months of surveillance, coordination with insiders, careful timing to avoid law enforcement, and the psychological manipulation of both victim and witnesses. Vito had not merely ordered a hit. He had orchestrated a spectacle that sent a clear, unmistakable message to every rival. He was untouchable, and the cost of defiance was immediate and absolute. Appalachian was meant to be Vito's crowning achievement. The secluded estate, nestled in the woods of upstate New York, was to host the leaders of America's criminal underworld. Seating arrangements were carefully planned, alliances calculated, and contingencies prepared for every conceivable betrayal. But the universe has a way of humbling even the most meticulous plans. A single patrol officer noticed unusual activity, and chaos erupted. Men scrambled into freezing woods, luxury cars were abandoned, and Vito's carefully choreographed summit became a nightmare of exposure. Yet even in that moment he remained composed, maneuvering through panic with the ease of a man who had survived bullets, betrayal, and exile. Behind the public displays of violence and power, Vito's mind was always at work. He cataloged loyalty, measured intentions, and anticipated consequences with surgical precision. Even from prison, his influence persisted. Orders traveled through coded letters, visits, and trusted intermediaries. Rival territories shifted, associates were rewarded, and enemies vanished. It was a game played across cities, states, and even continents, and Vito was always at the center, the unseen hand guiding every move. Yet, within the shadows of his empire, moments of reflection revealed a man haunted by his own ambition. Alone in his cell or his private office, he would contemplate the lives he had touched or ended. Every decision, every betrayal weighed heavily in those rare moments of introspection. Did he regret any of it? Perhaps. But regret was a luxury Vito could not afford. Survival demanded vigilance, and power demanded ruthlessness. Even as whispers of conspiracy and revenge swirled around him, Vito remained unshaken. Allies plotted against him, rivals schemed, law enforcement closed in, and yet he adapted with ease. A casual meeting could become a test of loyalty. A private dinner could decide life or death. Every interaction was a calculated move in a game that spanned decades. And through it all, the city seemed to bend to his will. the underworld a reflection of his strategic mind. The final years of his life were marked by both consolidation and paranoia. From prison, he orchestrated hits, redirected alliances, and ensured that his empire would survive his absence. Letters carried coded instructions, intermediaries carried out complex operations, and those who underestimated his reach discovered too late that his presence extended far beyond the walls of his confinement. Even death could not silence him completely. The fear and respect he cultivated persisted long after his heartbeat ceased. He died on February 14, 1969. The empire he built and nearly lost remained intact, a testament to the brilliance and terror of his reign. Questions lingered. Did he find peace in his final moments, satisfied that his name would endure as legend? Did the shadows of those he betrayed follow him into death? Or did he, at last, step beyond their reach? The streets of New York, the smoky back rooms, and the shadowed corridors of power remembered him, not just as a man, but as a force, an idea, a king who moved unseen yet controlled everything in sight. VITO Genovese was the embodiment of calculated ambition, a master of fear, loyalty, and strategy. His life was a delicate balance of charm and brutality, visibility and invisibility, power and paranoia. He was more than a criminal. He was a legend, a shadow that haunted the underworld, a man whose intellect, cunning, and ruthlessness made him almost untouchable. And even today, decades after his death, his story remains a blueprint for ambition, a tale of shadows, and a reminder that some men are more than mortal. They are forces of history, forever etched into the darkness they once commanded. It was a damp night in Manhattan when VITO called one of his lieutenants to a private office above a quiet cafe. The city hummed below, unaware that a storm of power and death was being planned in that small room. Everything must be clean, VITO said softly, his voice calm but with a steel edge that brooked no argument. No mistakes. This isn't just about eliminating a rival. It's about sending a message. Do you understand? The man nodded, though his hand shook. He had delivered messages, run errands, and handled small jobs before, but nothing like this. VITO's gaze pierced him. If you fail, it won't just be your head on the line. Think carefully. Every move matters. VITO's mind, even in these quiet moments, was already 3 steps ahead. He imagined the rival receiving the first warning, seeing the subtle threats woven into gestures and words, sensing the inevitability of what was to come. Then, when the deed was done, the ripple effect, fear, obedience, and respect, consolidating his position as the Shadow King of the city. Later that week, the hit was executed flawlessly. 2 men, loyal to VITO without question, approached the target at a deserted pier. The plan was precise: silence, efficiency, and a message left where the wrong people could see it. VITO, observing from a distance through a pair of binoculars, felt a grim satisfaction. It was never pleasure, never cruelty for its own sake. It was control, order, power. Even his allies were not exempt from testing. On another night, he gathered a small group at a club in Little Italy. Drinks were served, cigars burned low, and conversation flowed smoothly, on the surface. Beneath, every word, glance, and hesitation was evaluated. One man's hesitation was noted. A subtle remark was filed away. By morning, VITO knew who could be trusted, who had doubts, and who might eventually betray him. Loyalty, he believed, was fragile and must be constantly earned, constantly tested. VITO's nights were often long, wandering the streets or his private estates, reviewing plans, revisiting threats, contemplating enemies and allies alike. He sometimes paused, staring at the city below, reflecting on the price of power. He had ordered murders, manipulated rivals, and orchestrated chaos that would ripple through the underworld for years. And yet, in those rare moments of silence, a shadow of doubt crept in. Could one misstep undo everything? Could trust, or lack thereof, unravel the empire he had built? Despite the constant tension, there were moments of human vulnerability. In rare instances, he allowed himself a drink, a private conversation, or a brief memory of simpler times. The streets of Italy, a family meal, the sea breeze on the docks. These glimpses of humanity only reinforced the legend. Vito Genovese was a man who walked between two worlds, the mortal and the mythic, the human and the unstoppable force of the underworld. The Appalachian meeting had left scars, but also lessons. Even exposed, Vito maneuvered through the aftermath with precision, reshaping alliances, managing rivalries, and reasserting control. Each setback was a test, each misstep an opportunity. His ability to turn crises into advantages was legendary. The world believed the meeting had been a disaster. Vito saw it as a stage to demonstrate resilience and cunning. In the final years, even imprisoned, he remained a master of strategy. Messages were sent through coded letters, through visits, through subtle signals that only loyalists could interpret. A rival was eliminated here, a territory secured there. Alliances recalibrated like a chessboard in constant motion. Vito's mind was the real empire. Walls, bars, and cells were merely obstacles to be navigated, not limits. As his health declined, he reflected privately on his life. Ambition had driven him, fear had honed him, and power had defined him. He thought of the men he had betrayed, the lives he had destroyed, and the empire he had built. Regret never lingered long. It was a luxury he could not afford. But memory sometimes surfaced, sharp and insistent, like shadows at dusk. Could he have lived differently? Perhaps. But every choice he made had been deliberate, every move calculated, and every outcome measured in survival and dominance. Vito Genovese died quietly on February 14, 1969. The streets, the clubs, the secret back rooms he had commanded seemed emptier without his presence. Yet even in death, his influence remained. Stories of his cunning, his ruthlessness, and his brilliance circulated, whispered by those who feared him, admired him, or simply respected the shadow he had cast over the city. He had become more than a man. He was a legend, a master of fear and strategy, an architect of power whose presence would never be forgotten. The story of Vito Genovese is a story of the delicate balance between power and paranoia, loyalty and betrayal, visibility and the shadows. It is a tale of a man who walked among mortals yet seemed larger than life, whose intellect, patience, and ruthlessness made him almost untouchable, and whose legacy continues to echo in the corridors of the underworld. He was the Shadow King, the master of the game, a man who understood that control is not given. It is taken, defended, and constantly tested. And in that understanding lies the enduring mystery of Vito Genovese, a man who lived, fought, and ruled in the shadows, leaving a mark that time could never erase. Even in the quiet moments when the city slept and only distant sirens broke the silence, Vito thought like a king surveying his empire. Every corner, every alley, every whisper of movement was catalogued in his mind. He knew the streets, but he also knew the men who walked them, their ambitions, their weaknesses, their fears. Power, he understood, was not merely what you held. It was what others believed you could wield, and belief could be shaped, manipulated, and controlled, just like the people who surrounded him. Sometimes he lingered in small, dimly lit bars, watching interactions without being noticed. A handshake too firm, a gaze that lingered too long, a laugh that seemed false. These small details told him everything. By observing quietly, he anticipated conflicts before they arose, discovered traitors before they struck, and reinforced loyalty without raising suspicion. It was a delicate dance of psychology, intimidation, and charm, one that only a master like Vito could perform. The empire he built was never static. Territories shifted, loyalties were tested, and alliances broke and reformed like waves on the Hudson. Vito orchestrated these changes with patience and precision, as though life itself were a game of chess. One wrong move could cost a man his life. One hesitated decision could cost a family its fortune. And yet, Vito moved through it all, as if guided by an invisible hand. The calm eye of the storm that was the New York underworld. Even as age crept in, and prison walls threatened to contain him, Vito never stopped thinking, planning, imagining the next move. He had survived betrayals, bullets, exile, and public exposure. He had outmaneuvered enemies in the streets, in back rooms, and in courtrooms. Now, confined, he was a strategist, a general commanding forces from behind bars, his empire extending far beyond the reach of ordinary men. He understood that legacy was not built in comfort, nor in fleeting moments of victory. It was built in shadows, in whispers, in the fear and respect of others, in the careful orchestration of power. Every act, every decision, every threat was a thread in the vast tapestry he wove, a tapestry of influence, terror, and control that would outlast him. When his heart finally gave out on February 14, 1969, the world lost a man, but the legend of Vito Genovese lived on. His name continued to strike fear, inspire awe, and invite endless fascination. Some called him genius, others called him monster, but all agreed on one thing. He had understood the rules of power better than anyone, had played the game with ruthless intelligence, and had left behind a shadow empire that would haunt the streets long after he was gone. Vito Genovese was the Shadow King of New York, a man who walked unnoticed yet controlled everything, who could charm and destroy with the same breath, who understood that true power is mental, relentless, and absolute. His life is a blueprint of ambition, fear, and strategy, a story of darkness and brilliance intertwined, a tale that reminds us that some men are more than mortal. They are forces of history, forever echoing in the shadows they once commanded. And even now, decades after his death, when the city hums and the streets bustle, there is a whisper in the corners, a pause in a conversation, a glance over his shoulder. The ghost of Vito Genovese, the Shadow King, still watching, still calculating, still untouchable. Even in death, Vito's presence lingered. The neighborhoods he once walked felt different. Whispers of his decisions, his strikes, and his subtle manipulations seemed to echo in alleyways and smoky rooms. Men who had once served him still paused at the mention of his name. Fear, respect, and fascination mingled in a way only a true Shadow King could inspire. His story was told quietly, in hushed tones, as if speaking too loudly might awaken the very ghost of the man himself. There were nights when former allies would sit alone, nursing drinks, and remember the precision of his mind. How he could orchestrate entire operations while seated silently in a room, observing, calculating. How a single gesture, a single glance from him could determine life or death. How he had mastered the art of survival and dominance in a world built on betrayal. These recollections became legends, tales that blurred the line between fact and myth, a testament to the man who had made shadows obey his will. And so, the life of Vito Genovese stands as a story of contrasts, brutality and charm, fear and respect, visibility and invisibility. He was a man who understood the ultimate truth of power, that it is earned in silence, maintained in vigilance, and remembered long after one has gone. In his empire of shadows, every whisper, every glance, every move was calculated, and every consequence deliberate. Even now, decades later, one can walk the streets he once ruled and feel it, a tension in the air, the memory of footsteps that once commanded fear, the unspoken acknowledgement that someone, somewhere, once moved through the city with a vision and a ruthlessness that none could match. Vito Genovese was not just a mobster, he was a force, a strategist, a Shadow King whose reach extended beyond his lifetime. Power, ambition, and survival defined him. Fear, respect, and legend immortalized him. And in the quiet corners of New York, in the back rooms and alleys, in the faint echoes of history, he remains untouchable, calculating, and eternal. Vito Genovese, the Shadow King who almost ruled it all, lives on not just in memory, but in the very rhythm of the streets he once commanded, a reminder that some men do not merely walk among mortals, they become the shadows themselves, and their influence stretches far beyond the reach of life or death. New York in the 1940s was a city of extremes: wealth and poverty, celebration and fear, music and violence. VITO Genovese moved through it like a man who owned both the light and the shadows. Even in crowded streets, he could feel the pulse of the city. Who was watching? Who was whispering? Who was planning against him? Every night brought opportunity and risk. One moment, a casual passerby might hold vital information. The next, a rival could appear in an alleyway, knife in hand, ready to claim a throne VITO had already set his sights on. It was on nights like these that VITO's genius became apparent. He could sit in a dimly lit corner of a tavern, sipping a single espresso, eyes scanning, ears tuned to every conversation. A man mentioned a shipment arriving late. Another complained about a colleague's hesitation. Every word, every glance was cataloged. By morning, VITO knew what actions needed to be taken, which allies required reassurance, and which enemies required elimination. His mind worked like clockwork, meticulous, relentless, and precise. One evening, a courier arrived with a message. A rival faction was plotting to ambush one of VITO's lieutenants. Instead of reacting impulsively, VITO devised a plan. He instructed the lieutenant to follow false leads, to make subtle mistakes that would expose the rival's intentions. At midnight, in the rain-slick streets of Brooklyn, the rival gang arrived, expecting an easy target. Instead, they walked into a carefully orchestrated trap. By sunrise, the streets were silent, the rival factions scattered, and VITO's dominance was unchallenged. To the outside world, it was a coincidence. To those who knew, it was a lesson. No one could outthink VITO Genovese. Even within his inner circle, loyalty was a constant concern. One night, VITO summoned 3 lieutenants to a private room above a closed nightclub. Cigars burned low, shadows danced across the walls, and VITO watched carefully as the men exchanged glances. "I hear whispers," he said softly, letting the silence stretch. "We all know that loyalty is tested in times of pressure. Tell me, who here is thinking of tomorrow before me?" His eyes lingered on each face, sharp and piercing. 2 men fidgeted. The third met his gaze without blinking. By the next week, the fidgeting men were quietly removed from the organization, a warning to anyone who considered betraying him. The assassination of Albert Anastasia was not a spontaneous act. It was a masterpiece of strategy that exemplified VITO's approach to power. Months of surveillance preceded the hit. Plans were adjusted daily, contingencies calculated for every possible outcome. 2 men, disguised as barbers, entered the hotel shop. Shots rang out, echoing through marble halls. In the aftermath, fear and chaos spread. But to VITO, it was more than a hit. It was a demonstration of inevitability. A lesson that power, when wielded with intelligence and patience, was unstoppable. Even when the Appalachian meeting ended in chaos, VITO's mind did not waver. Law enforcement may have exposed the summit, but he adapted quickly. He rebuilt alliances, manipulated perceptions, and ensured that those who had witnessed his plans would think twice before challenging him again. The failure of secrecy became a lesson in resilience. The empire of VITO Genovese was not held together by fear alone, but by strategy, foresight, and unflinching control. In his private moments, however, VITO's mind revealed cracks of humanity. Alone in his study, he sometimes contemplated the lives he had ended, the trust he had betrayed, and the empire he had built on the foundations of blood and fear. Regret never lingered long. It was a luxury for ordinary men, but reflection occasionally cast a shadow over his mind. What if a single decision had been different? What if one ally had turned at the wrong time? These thoughts were fleeting, but they reminded him that the game of power was never static, and that vigilance was eternal. VITO's influence stretched far beyond the streets of Manhattan. New Jersey, Brooklyn, and even parts of Italy were connected by a web of loyalists, informants, and intermediaries. He communicated through coded letters, subtle signals, and carefully chosen messengers. Orders were executed flawlessly, territories were secured, and rival factions were neutralized. From prison later in life, he maintained the same precision. Walls could contain his body, but his mind, his influence, roamed free, unstoppable. Even in confinement, he observed the world with a hawk's precision. Rival factions tested his patience, allies sought his guidance, and every movement in the underworld was catalogued. Decisions made decades earlier bore fruit in unexpected ways. The empire he had built was alive, dynamic, and adaptive, a reflection of his intellect and vision. And yet, despite power, mastery, and influence, Vito Genovese remained haunted by the shadows of his choices. Deaths he had ordered, betrayals he had orchestrated, and alliances he had broken were never forgotten. In the quiet hours, he wondered if the ghosts of his past could touch him even in prison, even in the moments when he seemed untouchable. When he died on February 14, 1969, the empire he had fought decades to build remained intact, but the man himself became legend. Stories of his precision, cunning, and ruthlessness circulated in whispers, shaping a mythology that blurred fact and fiction. He had walked among mortals, yet transcended them. He had commanded fear, inspired respect, and created an empire that could not be erased. Vito Genovese, the Shadow King, had moved through life like a ghost, unseen but omnipresent, calculating every risk and every advantage. Even in death, the city he once ruled remembered him, in the alleyways, in the back rooms, in the quiet tension of a glance or a word. He was more than a man. He was an idea, a force, and a master of shadows whose influence stretched beyond the limits of mortality. And so the story ends, not with a scream, not with a fall, but with the echo of footsteps in the dark. The silent, calculated legacy of a man who understood that true power is not taken by force alone, but by patience, strategy, and the ability to command fear and respect simultaneously. Vito Genovese was the Shadow King who almost ruled it all, a man who made the city itself bend to his will, and a legend that would never die. Even as the city moved on, Vito's shadow lingered. The streets he had walked, the clubs he had commanded, the docks he had controlled. They all seemed to hold their breath when his name was spoken. Generations of men rose and fell, but his influence remained, hidden in whispers, in cautionary tales, in the way decisions were made and power was wielded. The world outside may have seen a dead man, but the underworld never did. To them, he was eternal, a king who never truly left his throne. Some nights, in the quiet of old neighborhoods, men would speak his name softly, almost reverently, as if invoking a ghost. They remembered the meticulous way he planned every move, the patience with which he studied enemies, and the precision with which he executed power. They remembered the fear he commanded, the loyalty he demanded, and the genius with which he navigated a world built on betrayal. Even decades later, the mere mention of Vito Genovese could stop a conversation, redirect an argument, or cause a man to hesitate, a testament to the empire he had built, the legend he had become. And in the end, that was his true victory, not the money, not the territory, not the fleeting headlines of police investigations. The real triumph was control, the ability to shape fear, loyalty, and history itself. His body may have been confined to a cell, his life ended quietly in a hospital wing of a prison, but the empire he created, the legend he inspired, and the shadow he cast over the underworld endured. He had mastered the art of power so completely that even death could not erase it. Vito Genovese walked among mortals, yet he became more than mortal. He was the silent hand in the shadows, the strategist whose mind reached further than any gun, the king whose throne was not a chair, but the fear and respect of a city. And so, the story closes not with a final act, but with a lasting echo, the whisper of a man who commanded attention without speaking, who ruled without being seen, and whose name would forever carry the weight of legend. Vito Genovese, the Shadow King, the architect of fear and loyalty, the master of the unseen, remains untouchable. He lives on in the alleys, the smoke-filled rooms, the whispered warnings, and in the very pulse of New York itself, A reminder that some men do not merely pass through history, they define it, they command it, and they haunt it long after they are gone. Even now, when the city hums with life and the people hurry past without a thought for the past, the shadows remember him, the empire remembers him. And those who dare to rise too quickly, who trust too easily, or who forget the power of patience and calculation, will feel, in some inexplicable way, the presence of VITO GENOVESE, the Shadow King, who almost ruled it all.